Chapter 21 of The People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Folly of Otter. Juanna and Otter gained the circle of rocks where the little band lay watching and wonder-struck. That is, all except Soa, who sat apart, brooding, her arms clasped upon her breast. Things had befallen as she expected, as they must befall indeed, provided that Juanna did not forget her lesson or show fear, and that the dwarf did nothing foolish. But Soa knew well enough that this was but the beginning of the struggle, and that, though it might be comparatively easy for Juanna and Otter to enter the city and impose themselves upon its superstition-haunted people as the incarnations of their fabled gods, the maintenance of the imposture was a very different matter. Moreover, she knew, should they be discovered, that escape would be impossible, or at the best that it must be most difficult. Therefore she sat apart and brooded, for notwithstanding their present triumph, her heart foreboded evil. But with the others it was different. They had heard the singing, they had seen the regiment of great men prostrate themselves, and the sound of worshipping had come to their ears like thunder. But of the why and wherefore of it all they could only guess. "What has happened?" said Leonard eagerly. "Your initiation seems to have come off well." "Bid the men fall back and I will tell you," Juanna answered. Leonard did so, but instead of speaking she broke into hysterical laughter. Her nerves had been overstrained, and now they sought relief thus. "You must all be very respectful to Otter and myself," she said at length, "for we really are gods. Don't look shocked, Francisco. I begin to believe in it myself. We have only just found it out, but I assure you it is a fact. They accepted us fully, and that after no more than 5 minutes' cross-examination. Listen," and she told them all that had passed. While she was speaking, the regiment began to move, no longer in a square, but in formation of companies. Company by company it rushed past them, shaking the earth with its footsteps, and as each section went by it tossed its spears into the air as a salute, crying, "Glory to the Mother, glory to the Snake," and fled on towards the city. At length the story was done and the regiment was gone. "Well," said Leonard, "so far so good. Juanna, you are the bravest and cleverest girl in the whole world. Most young women would have forgotten everything and gone into hysterics at the critical point." "I kept them till afterwards," she answered demurely, "and as for being brave and clever, I only repeated what Soa taught me like a parrot. You see, I knew that I should be killed if I made any mistake, and such knowledge sharpens the memory. All I have to say is, if the snake they talk so much about is anything like those which are tattooed upon the old priest's breasts, I have no wish to make a nearer acquaintance with it. I hate snakes. There, don't say any more," for both Leonard and Francisco were breaking out in fresh protestations of gratitude and admiration. "If you want to thank anybody, thank Soa." "And so I do," said Leonard heartily, for his spirits had risen in a most wonderful manner. "Soa, you have told us the truth, and you have managed well, and I thank you." "Do you then take me for a liar?" the woman answered, fixing her gloomy eyes upon Leonard's face. "I told you the truth, Deliverer, when I said that my people would accept the Shepherdess and this black dog of yours as their gods. But did I not tell you also that the death of the rest of us lies in the matter? If not, I say so now. You have not been named a god, Deliverer, nor has yonder bald pate." The natives called Francisco thus because of his tonsure. "And your black dog will betray you by his yapping. When you look down the jaws of the snake, remember then that Soa told you the truth, Deliverer. Perchance you shall find the red stones you seek hidden in his belly, white man." "Be silent," said Juanna indignantly, and Soa slunk back like a whipped hound. "Confound the old woman," put in Leonard with a shiver. "She is a black Jonah, and if I have to go inside this snake, I hope it will be a case of ladies first, that is all." "I am sure I don't know what has happened to Soa," said Juanna. "Her native air has a very bad effect upon her temper." "Well, the future must look after itself," answered Leonard, "snake or no snake. At present we must follow our luck. Otter, listen to me. Do you understand that you are a god, the god of this people?" "The god, Baas? What is a god?" "Have I not told you, thickhead? You are not a man any more, you are a spirit. Once, so it seems, you ruled this people in the past, and now you will rule them again. You and the shepherdess are both gods. She is your mother, and you are her child." "Yes, Baas, no doubt, but once I had another mother, a much uglier one." "Otter, cease to talk folly, else when you are no more a god I will beat you. Now you are a god, and we are all your servants, except the shepherdess. When you speak to us, you must speak roughly, like a great chief to the lowest of his people, calling us dogs and slaves. If you name me boss in public, I will beat you privately when you are no more a god. You will do best to speak little or not at all, so that none can take hold of your words, which are always foolish." "If you say that I am a god, Baas, it is enough, for doubtless you have met the gods and know their ways, though it is strange that none have told me this before. They must be an ugly people, the gods. But how will it be with the settlement men when they hear that I am a great spirit? They will say, 'Does a spirit wait upon a man and call him chief? Does a spirit clean the guns and cook the food of a man?' They will ask many such things, and the great people will hear them. And will they think that I am a god? No, they will know me for a liar, and will kill me and all of us." "That is true," said Leonard. Then he summoned Peter and the settlement men and addressed them. He told them that the plot had succeeded, and that Otter and the shepherdess were accepted as the gods of the people of the mist. Because of this they were left alive and held in honour, who but for it would now be dead, riddled through with the arrows of the great people. He explained to them for the second time that it was necessary to the safety of all that this delusion as to the divinity of Otter and the shepherdess should be maintained, since, if the slightest suspicion of the fraud crossed the minds of the great people, without doubt they would all be sacrificed as impostors. This was the tale that they must tell. They should say that all of them were hunting game in a far country with himself, Soa and Francisco, when one night they heard a singing, and by the light of the moon they saw the shepherdess and the dwarf Otter coming towards them. Then the shepherdess and Otter commanded them to be their servants and travel with them to a new land, and they obeyed them, black and white together, for they saw that they were not mortals. This was the tale that they must tell. Moreover, they must act upon their words if they would continue to look upon the sun. But their first surprise was past. The settlement men, who were quick-witted people, entered into the spirit of the plot readily enough. Indeed, Peter caused them to repeat the story to him, so he might be sure that they had its details by heart. Then they continued their march to the city on the hill. The two white men went first, next came Juanna and Otter, followed by Soa, and last of all walked the settlement men. An hour's journey brought them to the bank of the river, which, dividing above it, engirdled the town, to reunite near the roadway that they followed. Here canoes were ready to take them across to the island, or rather the peninsula, on which the city was built. On the other side of the river they found priests waiting in the great gateway with two litters that had been prepared for Juanna and Otter respectively. This, the further bank, was lined with some thousands of spectators who, when the divine pair set their feet upon its shores, prostrated themselves, men, women, and children, and burst into a shout of welcome. Juanna and Otter took no heed. With such dignity as they could command, and in the dwarf's case it was not much, they entered the litters, drew the hide curtains, and were borne forward swiftly. After them came Leonard, Francisco, and the others, while the population followed in silence. Now the sun was sinking, but enough of daylight was left to show how strange were the place and the people among which they found themselves. The city indeed was rudely built of like materials and in similar fashion to the house in the plain that has been described already, but the streets were roughly paved. Each habitation stood apart from the other in its own garden. The gates were of wood, fastened together with primitive iron bolts. There were drinking shops, or rather booths, and a large marketplace which they crossed as they ascended the hill, and where, as they afterwards discovered, this people carried on their trade, if trade it could be called, for they had no money, and conducted all transactions like other savages upon a principle of barter. As they went, Leonard took note of these things, which to his mind showed clearly that the inhabitants of this city were the degenerate inheritors of some ancient and forgotten civilization. Their fortifications, stone-built houses, drinking shops, and markets indicated this, just as their rude system of theology, with its divinities of light and darkness, or of death and life, each springing from the other, engaged in an eternal struggle, and yet one was probably the survival of some elaborate nature myth of the early world. But nothing struck him so much as the appearance of the people. In size they were almost giants, a peculiarity which was shared by the women, some of whom measured 6 feet in height. In common with other uncivilized races, most of these women wore little except a girdle and a goat-skin cloak that hung loosely upon their shoulders, displaying their magnificent proportions somewhat freely. They were much handsomer than the men, having splendid solemn eyes, very white teeth, and a remarkable dignity of gait. Their faces, however, wore the same sombre look as those of their husbands and brothers, and they did not chatter after the manner of their sex, but contented themselves with pointing out the peculiarities of the strangers in a few brief words to their children or to one another. After crossing the marketplace, the party came to a long and gentle ascent, which terminated at a wall surrounding the lower of the 2 great buildings that they had seen from the plain. Passing its gates, they halted at the doors of the first of these edifices. Here priests stood with torches, at least they judged them to be priests from the symbol of the snake head tattooed upon their naked breasts, ready to conduct them to their lodgings, for now the night was closing in rapidly. Soon they found themselves within the walls of a great house, built in the usual way with rough boulders, but on 3 sides of a square, and enclosing a courtyard in which a fountain bubbled. The furniture of the house was rude, but grotesquely carved, and in the courtyard stood a throne, sheltered by a roof of turf, and fashioned of black wood and ivory, with feet shaped like those of a human being. Indeed, as they afterwards discovered, this was the palace of the king, Olfan, who had been summarily ejected by the priests to make room for the newcomers. Here in this strange dwelling the attendant priests assigned them all quarters, the settlement men in one wing, Leonard, Francisco, and Soa in the other, and Juanna and Otter in 2 separate apartments in the body of the building. This arrangement involved the separation of the party, but it was difficult to offer objections, so they were forced to acquiesce in it. Presently women entered bearing food, boiled corn, milk in bowls, and roasted flesh in plenty, of which Leonard and Francisco ate with thankfulness. Before they went to sleep, Leonard looked into the courtyard, and was somewhat alarmed to find that guards were stationed at every door, while in front of those leading to the apartments of Juanna and Otter stood a body of priests with torches in their hands. He made an effort to pass through these guards in order to visit Juanna, but without a word they lifted their great spears and stopped him, and for that time he abandoned the attempt. "Why do the priests stand before the door of the Shepherdess, Soa?" asked Leonard. "They guard the place of the gods," she answered. "Unless the gods will it, none may enter there." "Say, Soa," Leonard asked again, "are you not afraid of being here in your own land?" "I am very much afraid, Deliverer, for if I am found out, then I die. Yet many years have gone by since I fled. Few live who knew me, and perchance none remember me. Also now I do not wear my hair after the fashion of my people, and therefore I may escape, unless the priests discover me by their magic. And now I would sleep." On the following morning at dawn Leonard rose, and accompanied by Francisco walked into the courtyard. This time the soldiers did not try to stop them, but the priests were still standing in front of Juanna's door, looking like spectres in the grey mist. They went to them and signified by signs that they would worship the queen, but were sternly refused admission in words which they could not understand, but that Soa, who was listening, afterwards translated to them. "The mother has come to her home," said the spokesman, "and might be profaned no more by the eyes of the vulgar. The snake also was in his home, and none should look upon him." When arguments failed, Leonard tried to force his way through, and was met by a huge spear pointed at his throat. How things would have ended it is difficult to say, had not Juanna herself appeared at this juncture, standing between the curtains of the doorway. At the sight of her the priests and soldiers fell upon their faces, and Leonard had sufficient presence of mind to follow their example, dragging Francisco down beside him. "What is this tumult?" she asked the guards in their own tongue. "I tell you what it is, Juanna," said Leonard, rubbing his head upon the ground and speaking in English. "If you do not come to an understanding with these scoundrels, you will soon be cut off from all communication with us, and what is more, we shall be cut off too in another way. Will you be so good as to issue an order that we are to be admitted when we like?" Juanna turned towards the priest and spoke angrily. "Who has dared to forbid my servants to come before me and worship me? My will is my own, and I only make it known. It is my will that these white men and yonder black woman pass in before me at their pleasure." "Your will is our will, mother," said the priests humbly. So they went in, and the curtains were closed behind them. "I am so thankful to see you," said Juanna. "You don't know how dreadfully lonely it has been in this great room all night, and I am afraid of those solemn-eyed priests who stand round the door. The women who brought me food last evening crawled about the place on all fours like dogs. It was horrible." "I'm sorry that you have been left alone," said Leonard, "but you must try to make better arrangements. Soa might sleep with you at any rate. Where is Otter? Let us pay him a visit. I want to see how the god is getting on." Juanna went to the door and addressed the priest, saying that she desired to be led before the snake, and her servants with her. They demurred a little, then gave way, and all four of them were conducted, first into the courtyard in which no human being was to be seen, and thence to an adjoining chamber where a curious sight awaited them. In a huge chair set upon a dais sat Otter, looking furious and by no means at ease, while stretched upon the ground in front of him lay four priests who muttered prayers unceasingly. "Welcome, Baas," he cried in rapture at the sight of Leonard. "Welcome, Shepherdess." "You idiot," answered Leonard in Dutch, but speaking in the most humble voice and sinking to his knees, "If you will not remember that you are a god, I will pay you out so soon as we are alone. Bid these fellows be gone. The shepherdess will translate for you." "Go, dogs," said Otter, taking the hint. "Go and bring me food. I would speak with my servant, who is named Boss, and with my mother." "These are the words of the Snake, that he speaks in the holy tongue," said Juanna, and she translated them. The four priests rose, and bowing to the earth, crept backwards from the room. So soon as they were gone, Otter leaped from his throne with an exclamation of rage that caused the others to burst out laughing. "Laugh, Boss, laugh if you will," said the dwarf, "for you have never been a god, and don't know what it is. What think you, Boss? All night long I have sat upon that great stool, while those accursed dogs burnt stinking stuff beneath my nostrils and muttered nonsense. 1 hour more and I should have fallen on them and killed them, for I have had no meat, and hunger makes me mad." "Hush," said Leonard, "I hear footsteps. On to your throne, Otter, quick. Juanna, stand by his side. We will kneel." They had barely time to obey when the curtains were drawn, and a priest entered, holding a vessel of wood covered with a cloth. Slowly he crept towards the throne, with his head bent almost to his knees. Then, straightening himself suddenly, he lifted up the wooden vessel and cried aloud: "We bring you food, O Snake. Eat and be satisfied." Otter took the dish, and lifting the cloth, gazed upon its contents hungrily, but with an ever-growing dissatisfaction. "Son of a dog," he cried in his own tongue, "is this food to set before a man?" And he held the platter downwards, exposing its contents. They were simple, consisting of various sorts of vegetables and watercress, poor in quality, for the season was winter, and all of them uncooked. In the centre of this fodder, whether placed there in obedience to some religious tradition, or by way of ornament, or perhaps to assist the digestive process of the god, as a tenpenny nail is said to assist that of an ostrich, was a fine ruby stone, not so big, indeed, as that which Soa had given to Leonard, but still of considerable size and value. Leonard saw it with delight, but not so the dwarf, the selfish promptings of whose stomach caused him to forget that his master had journeyed far to seek such gems as this. In the fury of his disappointed appetite, he stood upon the footstool of the throne, and, seizing the ruby, he hurled it at the priest, hitting him fair between the eyes. "Am I an eel," he roared, "that I should live on water-grass and red gravel?" Then the priest, terrified at the behaviour of the strange divinity, picked up the offending gem, to the presence of which he attributed his anger, and fled, never looking behind him. Juanna and Francisco were seized with uncontrollable laughter, while even Soa deigned to smile, but Leonard did not smile. "Oh, you last descendant of generation of asses," he said bitterly, "you ass with 4 ears and a tenfold bray, what have you done? You have hurled that precious stone at the head of him who brought it, and now he will bring no more. Had it not been for you, doubtless with every meal such stones would have been offered to you, and though you grew thin, we should all of us have become rich, and that without trouble, tricks, or violence." "Forgive me, Baas," lamented Otter, "but my rage took away my reason, and I forgot. See now what it is to be a god. It is to be fed upon stuff such as would gripe an ox. Oh, Baas, I would that these wild men had made you a god and left me your servant." And again he gazed with disgust upon the watercress and rows of leathery vegetables resembling turnips. "You had better eat them, Otter," said Juanna, who was still choking with laughter. "If you don't, you may get nothing more for days. Evidently you are supposed to have a small appetite." Thus driven to it by his ravening hunger, The wretched Otter fell upon the turnips and munched them sullenly, Leonard rating him all the while for his unequalled stupidity. Scarcely had he finished his meal when there was a stir without, and once again priests entered, headed on this occasion by the same aged man who had acted as spokesman when Juanna declared herself on the previous day, and who, as they had discovered, was named Nam. In fact, he had many other and much longer names, but as this was the shortest and most convenient of them, they adopted it. It chanced that Leonard was standing by Soa, and when this priest entered, whom she now saw face to face for the first time, he noticed that she started, trembled, and then drew back into the shadow of the throne. "Some friend of the old lady's youth," thought Leonard to himself. "I hope he won't recognise her, that is all." Nam bent himself in adoration before the gods. Then began an address, the substance of which Juanna translated from time to time. Bitterly did he grieve, he said, that such an insult had been offered to the snake as the presenting to him among his food of the red stone, known as the blood of Aca. The man who had done this folly was doomed to die, if indeed he were not already dead. Well could they understand that, the mother and snake having become reconciled, the proffering to Jâl of that which reminded him of the sin of long ago was a wickedness that might bring a curse upon the land. Let the snake be appeased. Command had been given that all such stones should be hidden in a secret place by him who had wrought the crime, and, as he had said, if the man returned alive from that place he should be slain. But he would not return alive, for to go thither was death, as it should be death henceforth even to mention that stone, of which but one should now be seen in the land, that which the mother wore in memory of the past. "Oh, Otter, my friend," murmured Leonard to himself, "if I don't make you pay for this, my name is not Outram." But enough of the stones, went on Nam. He had come upon a more important matter. That night an assembly of all the tribe would be held in the great temple an hour before moonrise, that the mother and snake might take up their royalty in the presence of the people. Thither they would come to lead them and their servants at the appointed time. Was this pleasing to the gods? Juanna bent her head in assent, and the priest turned to go with many obeisances. But before he went he spoke again, asking if all things were as the gods desired. "Not altogether, my servant," answered Juanna. "It is our will that these our other servants should have free access to us at all times and without question. Also it is our will that their food should be brought to them with our food. Moreover, it is the desire of the snake that no more grass should be given to him to eat, for now, in these latter days, having put on the flesh of men, he needs that which supports the flesh. One thing more, my servant, the snake forgives the affront that was offered him, and I command that some of the greatest of the holy stones should be brought to me, that I may look upon the blood which I shed so long ago." "Alas, it may not be, mother," answered the priest in tones of sorrow. "All the stones, both red and blue, have been placed in bags of hide and cast into that place whence they can be brought no more, together with him who offended. Nor can others be gathered at this season of the year, seeing that deep snow covers the place where they lie buried. In the summer, when the sun has melted the snow, more can be found, if your eyes still desire the sight of them." Juanna made no reply, and the priest went. "Here is a pretty business," said Leonard. "That idiot Otter has upset everything. We might have become millionaires for the asking, and now we must wait for months before we so much as get sight of a ruby or a sapphire." Nobody answered. Indeed, the whole party were plunged into consternation at the fatal effects of this accident. As for Otter himself, when he understood fully what he had done, he almost wept for grief. "Who could have known, Baas?" he groaned. "It was the sight of the green food that bewitched me, who have always hated the taste of grass. And now my folly has undone all, and it seems that I must be a god for many months if indeed they do not find me out." "Never mind, Otter," said Leonard, moved to pity by the dwarf's genuine grief. "You have lost the stones, and you will have to find them again somehow. By the way, Soa, why did you start so when that old priest came in?" "Because he is my father, Deliverer," she answered. Leonard whistled. Here was a new complication. What if Nam should recognise her? End of chapter 21. Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Temple of Jâl. In considerable agitation of mind, Leonard bid good-bye to Juanna, promising to return soon, and went to visit the settlement men, whom he had not seen since the previous evening. He found them in good case enough, so far as their material comfort was concerned, for they were well supplied with food and warmly lodged. So much could not be said, however, for their mental state, for they were terrified by the multitude of solemn priests and warriors who watched them as cats watch mice. Crouching round him dejectedly, they implored Leonard not to leave them, saying that they expected to be murdered every minute. He pacified them as well as he could, and left them with the assurance that he would return presently, having first reminded them that the lives of all depended upon the maintenance of the delusion as to the divinity of Otter and the shepherdess. The remainder of that day passed heavily enough. After the first excitement of this strange position had gone by, a reaction set in, and everybody was much depressed. As the hours drew on, the mist, which had lifted a little about 10 o'clock, closed in very densely, throwing the ill-lighted chamber where they sat into a deep gloom. In such an atmosphere conversation languished; indeed, at times it died altogether, and the only sound to be heard was that of the monotonous voices of the priests without the curtains, as they muttered prayers unceasingly. At length Leonard could bear it no longer, but rose, declaring that he was going out to see whatever might be seen. Juanna tried faintly to dissuade him, and Otter wished to come too, which was impossible. The end of it was that he went alone. First he revisited the settlement men and tried to cheer them, and sadly did they need cheering. Then he passed to the great gates of the palace yard and looked through them. The mist had lifted a little, and about 100 paces away he could perceive the doors of the temple, on either side of which rose cyclopean walls of 50 feet or more in height. It was obvious that here preparations for some ceremony were in progress, and on a large scale, for immense crowds of people were gathered about the doors, through which bodies of priests and armed men passed continually. More he could not learn, for the gates of the palace yard were barred and guarded, and the soldiers would not let him through. He stood by them watching till sunset, then returning to the others he told them what he had seen. An hour passed, and suddenly the curtains were drawn aside and a body of priests entered, 12 in number, bearing large candles of fat in their hands, and headed by their chief, Nam. Prostrating themselves before Juanna and Otter, they remained plunged in silence. "Speak on," Juanna said at length. "We come, O Mother, and O Snake," said the priest Nam, "to lead you to the temple that the people may look upon their gods." "It is well. Lead on," Juanna answered. "First you must be robed, mother," said Nam, "for without the temple none may look upon your divinity save your priests alone." Rising as he spoke, he produced a black dress from a grass bag, which was carried by an attendant. This dress was very curious. It fastened in front with buttons of horn, and either was, or seemed to be, woven in a single piece from the softest hair of black fleeced goats. Moreover, it had sleeves just long enough to leave the hands of the wearer visible, and beneath its peaked cap was a sort of mask with 3 slits, 2 for the eyes and 1 for the mouth. Juanna retired to put on this hideous garment over her white robe, and reappeared presently, looking like the black ghost of a medieval monk. Then the priests gave her 2 flowers, a red lily and a white, to be held in either hand, and it appeared that her equipment was complete. Next they came to Otter, and bound a scarlet fringe of hair about his forehead in such fashion that the fringe hid his eyes, at the same time placing in his hand a sceptre of ivory, apparently of very ancient workmanship and fashioned in the shape of a snake standing on its tail. "All is prepared," said Nam. "Lead on," answered Juanna again, "but let our servants come with us, both those here and those without, save the woman only, who stays to make ready for our return." Juanna spoke thus because Soa had announced her wish to be left behind when they went to the temple. Juanna had consulted Leonard on the subject, who gave it as his opinion that Soa had good reason of her own for making this request. Also he pointed out that in case of disturbance she could scarcely help them, and might possibly prove an encumbrance. "They wait," answered Nam. "All is prepared for them also," and as he spoke a sardonic smile flickered on his withered countenance that made Leonard feel very uncomfortable. What was prepared, he wondered? They passed through the curtains into the courtyard, where soldiers, clad in goat-skin cloaks, waited with 2 litters. Here also were the settlement men, armed, but in an extremity of fear, for they were guarded by about 50 of the great people, also armed. Juanna and Otter entered the litters, behind which Leonard formed up his little band, going in front of it himself with Francisco, both of them having rifles in their hands and revolvers at their girdles, of which no attempt was made to deprive them, for none knew their use. Then they started, surrounded by the bare-breasted priests, who chanted and waved torches as they walked, and preceded and followed by the grim files of tall soldiers, on whose spears the torchlight flashed ominously. As they came, the gates of the palace yard were opened. They passed them and across the space beyond until they reached the doors of the temple, which were thrown wide before them. Here Otter and Juanna descended from the litters, and all the torches were extinguished, leaving them in darkness. Leonard felt his hand seized and was led along, he knew not where, for the misty gloom was intense. He could scarcely see the face even of the priest who conducted them, but from the sounds he gathered that all their party was being guided in a similar fashion. Once or twice also he heard the voice of a settlement man speaking in accents of fear or complaint, but such demonstrations were followed quickly by the sound of a heavy blow, dealt no doubt by the priest or soldier in charge of that individual. Evidently it was expected that all should be silent. Presently Leonard became aware that they had left the open space across which they were walking, for the air grew close and their footsteps rang hollow on the rocky floor. "I believe that we are in a tunnel," whispered Francisco. "Silence, dog," hissed a priest in his ear. "Silence, this place is holy." They did not understand the meaning of the words at the moment, but the tone in which they were spoken made their purport sufficiently clear. Leonard took the hint, and at the same time clutched his rifle more tightly. He began to be afraid for their safety. Whither they were being led? To a dungeon? Well, they would soon know, and at the worst it was not probable that these barbarians would harm Juanna. They followed the tunnel or passage for about 150 paces. At first it sloped downwards, and then the floor became level, till at length they began to ascend a stair. There were 61 stone steps in this stairway, for Leonard counted them, each about 10 inches high, and when all were climbed they advanced 11 paces along a tunnel that echoed strangely to their steps, and was so low that they must bend their heads to pass it. Emerging from this tunnel through a narrow opening, they stood upon a platform also of stone, and once more the chill night air fanned their brows. So dense was the gloom that Leonard could tell nothing of the place where they might be, but from far beneath them rose a hissing sound as of seething water, and combined with it another sound of faint murmuring, as though thousands of people whispered to each other. Also from time to time he heard a rustling like that of a forest when a gentle wind stirs its leaves, or the rustling of the robes of innumerable women. This sense of the presence of hidden waters and of an unseen multitude was strange and terrifying in the extreme. It was as though, without perceiving them, their human faculties suddenly became aware of the spirits of the unnumbered dead, thronging, watching, following there, but intangible, speaking without words, touching without hands. Leonard was tempted to cry aloud, so great was the strain upon his nerves, which usually were strong enough. Nor was he alone in this desire. Presently a sound arose from below him, as of some person in hysterics, and he heard a priest command silence in a fierce voice. Then sobbing and laughter went on till it culminated in a shrill scream. After the scream came the thud of a blow, a heavy fall, a groan, and once again the invisible multitudes whispered and rustled. "Someone has been killed," muttered Francisco in Leonard's ear. "Who is it, I wonder?" Leonard shuddered, but made no answer, for a great hand was placed upon his mouth in warning. At length the portentous silence was broken, and a voice spoke, the voice of Nam the priest. In the silence all that he uttered could be heard plainly, but his words came from far away, and the sound of them was still and small. This was what he said, as Juanna told it to them after the ceremony. "Hear me, ye children of the Snake, ye ancient people of the Mist. Hearken to me, Nam, the priest of the Snake. Many a generation gone in the beginning of time, so runs the legend, that Mother Goddess, whom we worship from of old, descended from heaven and came hither to us, and with her came the Snake, her child. While she tarried in the land, the crime of crimes was wrought. The darkness slew the daylight, and she passed hence, we know not how or where, and from that hour the land has been a land of mist, and its people have wandered in the mist, for he whose name is Darkness has ruled over them, answering their prayers with death. But this doom was on the Snake, that because of his wickedness he must put off the flesh of men and descend into the holy place of waters, where, as we and our fathers have known, his symbol dwells eternally, taking tribute of the lives of men. Yet ere that crime was wrought, the mother gave a word of promise to her people. Now that I am about to die at the hands of him I bore, for so it is fated, she said, but not for ever do I leave you, and not for ever shall the Snake be punished by putting off the flesh of men. Many generations shall go by, and we will return again and rule over you, and the veil of mist shall be lifted from your land, and ye shall be great in the earth. Till then choose your kings and let them govern you. Moreover, forget not my worship, and see to it that throughout the ages the altar of the snake is wet with blood, and that he lacks not the food he loves. And I will give you a sign by which we shall be known when at length the fate is accomplished, and the hour of forgiveness is at hand. As a fair maid I will come again, a maid lovely and white, but because of his sin the snake shall appear in the shape of that which sits within your temple, and his hue shall be black and his face hideous. Out of the earth we will arise, and we will call to you, and ye shall know us, and we will tell you our holy names that shall not be spoken aloud from this hour to that hour of our coming. But beware lest ye be deceived and false gods set themselves among you, for then shall the last evil fall upon you, and the sun shall hide his face." Thus, children of the mist, did the mother speak to him who was her chief priest in the long ago, and he graved her words with iron on the stone that whereon I stand. But none can read the writing, for its secret is lost to us, although the prophecy remains. And now the time is full, and it has been given to me, his successor in my old age, to see the fulfilment of the saying. The time is full, and this night the promise of the past is accomplished. For people of the mist, the immortal gods, whose names are holy, have appeared to rule their children. Yesterday they came, ye saw them, and in your ears they called aloud the sacred names. As a maiden fair and white, and as a dwarf black and hideous, have they come. And Aka is the name of the maiden, and Yal is the name of the dwarf. He ceased, and his voice died away in the echoes of the great place. Once again there was silence, broken only by the seething sound of waters and the indefinable murmur of an unseen throng beneath. Leonard stood a while, then edged himself gently forward with the design of discovering where and upon what they were standing. His curiosity soon met with a violent check, for before he had gone a yard he felt that his right foot was dangling in space, and it was only by a strong effort that he prevented himself from falling, whither he knew not. Recovering his balance, he shuffled himself back again to the side of Francisco, and whispered a warning to him not to move if he valued his life. As Leonard spoke, he noticed that the blackness of the night was turning grey with the light of the unrisen moon. Already her rays, striking upwards, brightened the sky above and the mountains behind, and from them fell a pale reflection, which grew gradually stronger and clearer. Now he could discover that close upon him to the left a black mass towered high into the air, and that far beneath him gleamed something like the foam on broken water. For a time he watched this water, or whatever it might be, until a smothered exclamation from Francisco caused him to look up again. As he looked, the edge of the moon rose above the temple wall, and by slow degrees a wonderful sight was revealed to him. Not till the moon was fully visible did he see everything, and to describe all as he discovered it piecemeal would be difficult. This was what Leonard saw at length. Before him and underneath him lay a vast and roofless building, open to the east, covering some 2 acres of ground, and surrounded by titanic walls 50 feet or more in height. The building was shaped like a Roman amphitheatre, but with the exception of the space immediately below him, the area was filled with stone seats, and round its wide circumference stone seats rose tier on tier. These were all occupied by men and women in hundreds, and except at the farther end, scarcely a place was empty. At the western extremity of the temple, a huge statue towered 70 or 80 feet into the air, hewn to all appearance from a mass of living rock. Behind this colossus, and not more than 100 paces from it, the sheer mountain rose, precipice upon precipice, to the foot of a white peak clad in eternal snow. It was the peak they had seen from the plain when the mist lifted, and the statue was the dark mass beneath it which had excited their curiosity. This fearful colossus was fashioned to the shape of a huge dwarf of hideous countenance, seated with bent arms outstretched in a forward direction and palms turned upward as though to bear the weight of the sky. The statue stood, or rather sat, upon a platform of rock, and not more than 4 paces from its base, so that the outstretched hands and slightly bowed head overhung it. Indeed, was a circular gulf measuring perhaps 30 yards across, in which seething waters raged and boiled. Whence they came and whither they went it was impossible to see, but Leonard discovered afterwards that here was the source of the river which they had followed for so many days, escaping from the gulf by underground passages that it had hollowed for itself through the solid rock. The 2 branches of the torrent passed round the walls of the town to unite again in the plain below. How the pool itself was supplied Leonard was destined to learn in after days. Between the steep polished sides of the rock basin and the feet of the statue was placed an altar or sacrificial stone. Here on this ledge, which covered an area no greater than that of a small room, and in front of the altar, stood a man bound, in whom Leonard recognised Olfan the king, while on either side of him were priests, naked to the waist and armed with knives. Behind them again stood the little band of settlement men, trembling with terror. Nor were their fears groundless, for among them lay one of their number, dead. This was the man whose nerve had broken down, who shrieked aloud in the darkness, and in reward had been smitten into everlasting silence. All this Leonard saw by degrees, but the first thing that he saw has not yet been told. Long before the brilliant rays of the moon lit the amphitheatre, they struck upon the huge head of the dwarf idol, and there, on this giddy perch, some 70 feet from the ground and nearly 100 above the level of the pool of seething water, sat Juanna herself, enthroned in an ivory chair. She had been divested of her black cloak, and was clad in the robe of snowy linen, cut low upon her breast and fastened round her waist with a girdle. Her dark hair flowed about her shoulders. In either hand she held the lilies, red and white, and upon her forehead glowed the ruby like a blood-red star. She sat quite still, her eyes wide in horror, and first the moonlight gleamed upon the gem bound to her forehead. Next it showed the pale and lovely face beneath, then her snowy arms and breast, the whiteness of her robes, and the hideous demon head whereupon the throne was fixed. No spirit could have seemed more beautiful than this woman set thus on high in that dark place of blood and fear. Indeed, in the unearthly light she looked like a spirit, the spirit of beauty triumphing over the hideousness of hell, the angel of light trampling the devil and his works. It was not wonderful that this fierce and barbarous people sighed like reeds before the wind when her loveliness dawned upon them, made ethereal by the moon, or that thenceforth Leonard could never think of her quite as he thought of any other woman. Under such conditions most well-favoured women would have appeared beautiful. Juanna did more. She seemed divine. As the light grew downward and the shadows thinned before it, Leonard followed with his eyes, and presently he discovered Otter. The dwarf, naked except for his girdle and the fringe upon his head, was also enthroned, holding the ivory sceptre in his hand, but in a seat of ebony placed upon the knees of the colossus, nearly 40 feet below Juanna. Then Leonard turned to consider Francisco's position and his own, and found it terrible enough. Indeed, the moment that he discovered it was nigh to being his last. In company with two priests of the Snake, they were standing on the palm of the right hand of the idol, that formed a little platform some 6 feet square, which they had won in the darkness through a tunnel hewn in the arm of stone. There they stood, unprotected by any railing or support, and before them, on either side of them, was a sheer drop of some 90 feet to the water beneath, or 50 to the rock of the platform. Leonard saw, and for a moment turned faint and dizzy. Then, setting the butt of his rifle onto the stone, he leaned upon the barrel till his brain cleared. It was well for him that he had not known what lay beneath when, but now, he thrust his foot into vacancy, for then his senses might have failed him. Suddenly he remembered Francisco and opened his eyes, which he had closed to shut out the sight of the yawning gulf beneath. It was not too soon. The priest had seen also, and consciousness was deserting him. Even as Leonard turned, his knees gave way, and he sank forward and downward. Quick as a thought, Leonard stretched out his right hand and caught Francisco by the robe he wore. Then, resting his weight upon the rifle, he strained at the priest's falling body with all his force in such a manner that its direction was turned, and it fell sideways upon the platform, not downwards into space. Leonard dragged at him again, and thrust him into the mouth of the little tunnel through which they had reached this dreadful eminence, where he lay quiet and safe, lost in blessed insensibility. All this took place in a few seconds. The two priests of the Snake, who stood by them as calmly as though their feet were still on the solid earth, saw but made no movement. Only Leonard thought that they smiled grimly, and a horrible fear struck his heart like a breath of ice. What if they waited a signal to cast him down? It might well be so. Already he had seen enough of their rites to enable him to guess that theirs was a religion of blood and human sacrifice. He shivered, and again turned faint, so faint indeed that he did not dare to keep his feet, but sank into a sitting posture, resting his back against the stone of the idol's thumb. End of chapter 22. Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How Juanna Conquered Nam. Still the silence endured, and still the moonlight grew, creeping lower and lower till it shone upon the face of the seething waters, and except in the immediate shadow of the walls, all the amphitheatre was full of it. Then the voice of Nam spoke again from far away, and Leonard looked to see whence he spoke. Now he saw. Nam, attended by 3 priests, was perched like an eagle on the left palm of the colossus, and from this dizzy platform he addressed the multitude. Looking across the breast of the statue, Leonard could see the outstretched arm and the fierce face of the high priest as he glared down upon the people. Hearken, ye dwellers of the mist, children of the Snake. Ye have seen your ancient gods, your father and your mother, come back to rule you, and to lead you on through war to peace, to wealth, to power, and to glory. Ye see them now by that light, and in that place wherein only it is lawful that ye should look upon them. Say, do ye believe and do ye accept them? Answer, every one of you, answer with your voice. Then a mighty roar of sound went up from the gathered thousands, a roar that shaped itself into the words, "We believe and we accept." "It is well," said Nam, when the tumult had died away. "Hearken, ye high gods. O Aka and O Yal, bend down your ears and deign to hearken to your priest and servant, speaking in the name of your children, the people of the mist. Be ye kings to reign over us? Accept the power and the sacrifice, and sit in the place of kings. We give you rule through all the land. The life of every dweller in the land is yours. Yours are their cattle and their goats, their city and their armies. For your altars shall run red. The cry of the victim shall be music in your ears. Ye shall look upon him whom long ago you set to guard the secret awful place, and he shall crawl beneath your feet. As ye ruled our fathers, so ye shall rule us, according to the customs which ye laid down for ever. Glory be to you, O Aka, and to you, O Yal, immortal kings for evermore." And in a shout that rent the skies, the great audience echoed, "Glory be to you, O Aka, and to you, O Yal, immortal kings for evermore." Then Nam spoke again, saying, "Bring forth the virgin, that fair maid who is destined to the snake, that he may look upon her and accept her as his wife. Bring her forth also, who 12 months gone was vowed in marriage to the shape of the stone, that she may bid her lord farewell." As he spoke, there was a stir behind the idol, and presently from each side of it a woman was led forward by 2 priests, and onto the little space of rock between its feet and the edge of the gulf, and placed one to the right of the altar and one to the left. Both these women were tall and lovely, with the dark and somewhat terrifying beauty of the people of the mist. But there the resemblance between them ended. She to the right was naked, except for a girdle of snakeskin and the covering of her abundant hair, which was crowned with a wreath of red lilies, similar to the flower that the priests had given to Juanna. She to the left, on the contrary, was clothed in a black robe round which was broidered the shape of a blood-red snake, whose head rested upon her breast. Leonard noticed that the appearance of this woman was that of extreme terror, for she shrank and trembled, whereas that of the flower-crowned bride was jubilant and even haughty. For a moment the 2 women stood still, while the people gazed upon them. Then, at a signal from Nam, she who was crowned with flowers was led before the altar, and thrice she bowed the knee to the idol, or rather to Otter, who sat upon it. Now all eyes were fixed on the dwarf, who stared at the girl but made no sign, which was not wonderful, seeing that he had no inkling of the meaning of the ceremony. As it chanced, he could not have acted more wisely, at least in the interest of the bride, for here, as elsewhere, silence was held to give consent. "Behold, the god accepts," cried Nam. "The beauty of the maid is pleasing in his eyes. Stand aside, Saga the blessed, that the people may look upon you and know you. Hail to you, wife of the snake." Smiling triumphantly, the girl moved back to her place by the altar, and turned her proud face to the people. Then the multitude shouted, "Hail to you, bride of the snake! Hail to you, the blessed, chosen of the god!" While the tumult lasted, the woman who was clad in the black robe was led forward, and when it had died away, she also made her obeisance before the idol. "Away with her, that she may seek her lord in his own place," cried Nam. "Away with her, her day is done," echoed the multitude. Then before Juanna could interfere, before she could even speak, for, be it remembered, she alone understood all that was said, the 2 priests who guarded the doomed woman rent the robe from her, and with one swing of their strong arms hurled her backwards far into the pool of seething waters. She fell with a shriek and lay floating on their surface, flung this way and that by the eddy of the whirlpool, just where the moonlight beat most brightly. All who could of the multitude bent forward to see her end, and overcome by a fearful fascination, Leonard threw himself on his face, and craning his head over the stone of the idol's hand, watched also. For the girl's struggling shape was almost immediately beneath him. Another minute, and he would have foregone the hope of winning the treasure which he had come so far to seek, not to have yielded to the impulse. For, as he stared, the waters beneath the feet of the idol were agitated as a pond is agitated by the rush of a pike when he dashes at his prey. Then for an instant the light gleamed upon a dull, enormous shape, and suddenly the head of a crocodile reared itself out of the pool. The head of a crocodile, but of such a crocodile as he had never heard nor dreamed of. For this head alone was broader than the breast of the biggest man. Its dull eyes were the size of a man's fist, its yellow fangs were like the teeth of a lion, and from its lower jaw hung tentacles or lumps of white flesh, which at that distance gave it the appearance of being bearded like a goat. Also the skin of this huge reptile, which could not have measured less than 50 feet in length by 4 feet in depth, was here and there corroded into rusty excrescences, as though some fungus or lichen had grown upon it, like a grey moss on an ancient wall. Indeed, its appearance seemed to point to extreme antiquity. Footnote: crocodiles are proverbially long-lived, but Leonard could never discover the age of this particular reptile. On inquiry he was able to trace it back for 300 years, and tradition said that it had always dwelt among the people of the mist from the beginning of time. At least it was very old, and under the name of the snake had been an object of worship for many generations. How it came among the people of the mist is difficult to say, for no other specimen appeared to exist in the country. Perhaps it was captured in some distant age and placed in the cave by the priests, to figure as an incarnation of the snake that was the object of their worship. End of footnote. Hearing the disturbance in the water, the reptile had emerged from the cave where it dwelt beneath the feet of the idol, to seek its accustomed food, which consisted of human victims that were cast to it at certain intervals. It reared its hideous head and glared round. Then of a sudden the monster and the victim vanished together into the depths. Sick with horror, Leonard drew himself back into a sitting posture and glanced up at Juanna. She was crouched in her ivory chair, overcome, and her eyes were closed, either through faintness or to shut out the sight of dread. Then he looked down at Otter. The dwarf, staring fixedly at the water, sat still as the stone effigy that supported him. Evidently, in all his varied experience, he had seen no such thing as this. "The snake has accepted the sacrifice," cried Nam again. "The snake has taken her who was his bride to dwell with him in his holy house. Let the offerings be completed, for this is but the first fruit. Take Olfan, who was king, and offer him up. Cast down the white servants of the mother, and offer them up. Seize the slaves who stood before her in the plain, and offer them up. Lead forth the captives, and offer them up. Let the sacrifice of crowning of kings be accomplished according to custom, that the god whose name is Jal may be appeased, that he may listen to the pleadings of the mother, that the sun may shine upon us, that fruitfulness may fill the land, and peace be within its gates." Thus he cried, while Leonard felt his blood turn cold and his hair rise upon his head, for though he could not understand the words, he guessed their purport, and his instinct told him that a great danger threatened them. He looked at the two priests who stood by, and they glared hungrily on him in answer. Then his courage came back to him. At least he had his rifle, and would fight for his life, it must go hard if he could not put a bullet through one or both of them before they got hold of him. Meanwhile the priests below had seized the king Olfan, whose giant form they were dragging towards the stone of sacrifice. But of a sudden, for the first time, Juanna spoke, and a deep silence fell upon the temple and all within it. "Hearken, people of the mist," she said, and her voice, falling from that great height, seemed small and far away, although so clear that every word was audible in the stillness of the night. "Hear me, people of the mist, and ye, priests of the snake. Aca is come again, and Jâl is come again, and ye have given them back their rule after many generations, and in their hands lies the life of every one of you. As the old tradition told of them, so they are, the mother and the child, and the one is clothed with beauty, the symbol of life and the fruitful earth, and the other is black and hideous, the symbol of death and the evil that walks upon the earth. And ye who would do sacrifice to Jâl, that he may be appeased according to the ancient law, and listen to the pleading of the mother that fruitfulness may fill the land. Not so shall Jâl be appeased, and not because of the sacrifice of men shall Aca plead with him that prosperity may reign in the land. Behold, the old law is done away, and we give you a new law. Now is the hour of reconciliation. Now life and death walk hand in hand, and the hearts of Aca and Jâl have grown gentle through the ages, and they no longer crave the blood of men as an offering to their majesty. Henceforth ye shall bring them fruits and flowers, and not the lives of men. See, in my hand I hold winter lilies, red and white. Blood red they are, and white as snow. Now the red flower, token of sacrifice and slaughter, I crush and cast away, but the white bloom of love and peace I set upon my breast. It is done, gone is the old law. See, it falls into the place of the snake, its home. But the new law blossoms above my heart and in it. Shall it not be so, my children, people of the mist? Will ye not accept my mercy and my love?" The multitude watched the red bloom as, bruised and broken, through the light and through the shadow, they fell slowly to the seething surface of the pool. Then it looked up like one man, and saw the white lily set upon Juanna's whiter breast. They saw, and moved by a common impulse, they rose with a sound like the rush of the wind and shouted: "Gone is the day of blood and sacrifice. Come is the day of peace. We thank you, Mother, and we take your mercy and your love." Then they were silent, and again there was a sound like that of the wind, as all their thousands sank back to their seats of stone. Now Nam spoke again in a voice of fury that rang through the still air like a clarion. "What is this that my ears hear?" he cried. "Are ye mad, O ye dwellers in the mist, or does the mother speak with a charmed voice? Shall the ancient worship be changed in an hour? Nay, not the gods themselves can alter their own worship. Slay on, ye priests, slay on, or ye yourselves shall die the dreadful death." The priests below heard, and seizing the struggling king, they cast him with difficulty down upon the stone. "Leonard, Leonard," cried Juanna in English, addressing him for the first time by his Christian name, and even then he noticed, but looking straight before her that none might guess to whom she spoke, "these priests are going to kill you and all of us, except Otter and myself. If you can, when you see me point with my hand, shoot that man who is about to sacrifice the king. Make no answer." Leonard heard and understood all. Resting his back firmly against the thumb of the statue, he shifted his position a little, so that the group below him came within his line of sight, and waited, watching Juanna, who now was speaking again in the language of the people of the mist. "This I promise you, ministers of blood," she said. "If ye obey me not, ye shall indeed die the dreadful death, the death unknown. Hearken, my servant, who are named Deliverer," and she looked down upon Leonard, "and do my bidding. If one of these shall dare lift his hand against yonder man, slay him swiftly as you know how." "Smite on!" screamed Nam, "smite on and fear not." Most of the priests drew back affrighted, but one ruffian lifted his knife, and at that moment Juanna pointed with her hand. Then Leonard, stepping forward, covered the priest's great breast with his rifle as surely as the uncertain light would allow. Unconscious of his danger, the executioner muttered an invocation. Now the knife was about to fall upon the throat of Olfan, when fire and smoke sprang out far above him. The rifle rang and shot through the heart. The priest leaped high into the air and fell dead. Terror seized the witnesses of this unaccustomed and to them most awful sight. "The gods speak with flame and thunder," one cried, "and death is in the flame." "Silence, dogs!" screamed Nam. "Ye are bewitched. Hold, you that stand on high, cast down the wizard who is named Deliverer, and let us see who will deliver him from death upon the stone." Then one of the guards who stood by him made a movement to grasp Leonard and throw him down, but the other was terrified and could not stir. The first man stretched out his arm, but before it so much as touched its aim, he himself was dead. Foreseeing his purpose, Leonard had lifted the rifle, and once more its report rang through the temple. Suddenly the priest drew his arms wide, then fell backwards, and with a mighty rush dived into the sheer space to crash lifeless on the stone floor below, where he lay, his head and hands hanging over the edge of the pool. Now for the first time Otter's emotion overcame him. He stood up on the knees of the dwarf, and shaking the sceptre in his hand, he pointed with it to the dead man on the paving below, at the same time crying in stentorian tones, "Well done, boss, well done. Now tumble the old one yonder off his perch, for I weary of his howlings." This speech of Otter's produced even a greater effect on the spectators, if that were possible, than the mysterious death of the priests. That he whose name was Silence should cry aloud in a strange tongue, of which they understood no single word, was a dread and ominous thing that showed his anger to be deep. But Leonard took no heed. He was too engaged in covering the second guard with the barrel of his repeater. This man, however, had no liking for such a dreadful death. Swiftly he flung himself on to his knees, imploring Leonard to spare him in humble accents, and with gestures that spoke more plainly than his words. Taking advantage of the pause, again Juanna cried aloud, "Ye see, people of the mist, I make no idle threats. Where are they now, the disobedient ones? The tongue of flame has licked them, and they are dead. As they have perished, so shall perish all who dare to gainsay my word, or the word of Jâl. Ye know us for gods, and ye have crowned us kings, and gods and kings we are indeed. Yet fear not, for on the rebellious only shall our anger fall. Answer you, Nam, will you do our bidding, or will you die also as your servants died?" Nam glanced round desperately. He looked down on the multitude and found no help there. Long they had cowered beneath him, now hope was born in their breasts, and in the presence of a power greater than his, if only for a little while, they broke his yoke and the yoke of their red superstitions. He looked at the company of priests. Their heart was out of them. They were huddled together like knots of frightened sheep, staring at the corpses of their two companions. Then he bethought him of Otter. Surely there was refuge in the god of blood and evil, and he cried to him, "The mother has spoken. but the mother is not the child. Say, old Yaw, what is your command?" Otter made no answer, because he did not understand, but Juanna replied swiftly: "I am the mouth of Yaw, as Yaw is my hand. When I speak the words of Yaw. Do his bidding and mine, or die, you disobedient servant." This was the end of it. Nam was beaten. For the first time in his life he must own a master, and that master the gods who he himself discovered and proclaimed. "So be it," he said suddenly. "The old order passes and the new order comes. So be it. Let your will be done, O Aca and old Jâl. I have striven for your glory. I have fed your altars, and ye threaten me with death and put away my gift. Priest, set free that man who was king. People, have your way. Forget your ancient paths. Pluck the white flower of peace and perish. I have said." So he spoke from on high, shaking his clenched fists above his hoary head, and was gone. Then the executioners unbound the limbs of the ex-king, and he rose from the stone of death. "Olfen," cried Juanna from on high, "you that were king, we, who have taken your kingship, give you life and liberty and honour. See that in reward you serve us well, lest again you should lie upon that bed of stone. Do you swear fealty to us?" "For ever and for ever I swear it by your holy heads," answered Olfen. "It is well. Now under us once more, we give you command of the armies of this people, our children. Summon your captains and your soldiers. Bid those that brought us hither lead us back whence we came, and there set guards about us so that none trouble us. For you, our people, for this time fare you well. Go in peace, to dwell in peace beneath the shadow of our strength." End of chapter 23. 24 of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Olfen tells of the rubies. It was at this juncture that Francisco recovered his senses. "Oh," he gasped, opening his eyes and sitting up. "Is it done? Am I dead?" "No, no, you are alive and safe," answered Leonard. "Stay where you are, and don't look over the edge or you will faint again. Here, take my hand. Now, you brute," and he made energetic motions to the surviving priest, indicating that he must lead them back along the path by which they had come, at the same time tapping his rifle significantly. The man understood and started down the darksome tunnel as though he were glad to go, Leonard holding his robe with one hand, while with the other he pressed the muzzle of the loaded rifle against the back of his neck. Francisco followed, leaning on Leonard's shoulder, for he could not walk alone. As they had come, so they returned. They passed down the steps of stone which were hollowed in the body of the colossus. They traversed the long underground tunnel, and at length, to their intense relief, once more they stood upon the solid ground and in the open air. Now that the moon was up and the mist which had darkened the night had melted, they could see their whereabouts. They had emerged upon a platform of rock within a bowshot of the great gates of the palace, from whence the secret subterranean passage used by the priests was gained, its opening being hidden cunningly among the stonework of the temple. "I wonder where the others are," asked Leonard anxiously of Francisco. As he spoke, Juanna, wrapped in her dark cloak, appeared, apparently out of the stones of the wall, and with her Otter, the settlement men bearing their dead companion, and a considerable company of priests, among whom, however, Nam was not to be seen. "Oh, is that you, Leonard?" said Juanna in English, and in a voice broken with fear. "Thank heaven that you are safe." "Thank heaven that we all are safe," he answered. "Come, let us get on. No, we can walk, thank you," and he waved away the priests, who produced the litters from where they had hidden them under the wall. The men fell back and they walked on. At the gate of the palace a welcome sight met their eyes, for here stood Olfan, and with him at least 100 captains and soldiers, who lifted their spears in salute as they advanced. "Olfan, hear our bidding," said Juanna. "Suffer no priests of the Snake to enter the palace gates. We give you command over them, even till death. Set guards at every doorway and come with us." The ex-king bowed and issued some orders, in obedience to which the sullen priests fell back murmuring. Then they all passed the gates, crossed the courtyard, and presently stood in the torch-lit throne room, where Juanna had slept on the previous night. Here food had been prepared for them by Soa, who looked at them curiously, especially at Leonard and Francisco, as though indeed she had never expected to see them again. "Hearken, Olfan," said Juanna. "We have saved your life tonight, and you have sworn fealty to us. Is it not so?" "It is so, Queen," the warrior answered, "and I will be faithful to my oath. This heart, that but for you had now been cold, beats for you alone. The life you gave back to me is yours, and for you I live and die." As he spoke he glanced at her with an expression in which, as it seemed to Juanna, human feelings was mixed with supernatural awe. Was it possible, she wondered, with a thrill of fear, that this savage king was mingling his worship of the goddess with admiration of the woman? And did he begin to suspect that she was no goddess after all? Time would show, but at least the look in his eyes alarmed her. "Fear not," he went on. "1,000 men shall guard you night and day. The power of Nam is broken for a while, and now all this company may sleep in peace." "It is well, Olfan. Tomorrow morning, after we have eaten, we will talk with you again, for we have much to say. Till then, watch." The great man bowed and went, and at last they were alone. "Let us eat," said Leonard. "What is this, spirit, or a very good imitation of it? Well, I never wanted a glass of brandy more in my life." When they had finished their meal, at the request of Leonard, Juanna translated all that had been said in the temple, and among her listeners there was none more interested than Soa. "Say, Soa," said Leonard, when she had finished, "you did not expect to see us come back alive, did you? Is that why you stayed away?" "No, Deliverer," she answered. "I thought that you would be killed, every one of you, and so it must have come about, had it not been for the Shepherdess. Also I stayed away because those who have looked upon the Snake once do not desire to see him again. Many years ago I was bride to the Snake, Deliverer, and, had I not fled, my fate would have been the fate of her who died this night." "Well, I do not wonder that you choose to go," said Leonard. "Oh, Baas," broke in Otter, "why did you not shoot that old medicine man as I told you? It would have been easy when you were about it, Baas, and now he would have been broken like an eggshell thrown from the housetop, and not alive and full of the meat of malice. He is mad with rage and wickedness, and I say that he will kill us all if he can." "I rather wish I had," said Leonard, pulling his beard. "I thought of it, but could not do everything. And on future occasions, Otter, will you remember that your name is Silence? Luckily these people do not understand you. If they did, you would ruin us all. What is the matter, Soa?" "Nothing, Deliverer," she answered. "Only I was thinking that Nam is my father, and I am glad that you did not shoot him, as this black dog, who is named a god, suggests." "Of gods I know nothing, you old cow," answered Otter angrily. "They are far off people, though it seems that I am one of them, at any rate among these fools your kinsmen. But of dogs I can tell you something, and it is that they bite." "Yes, and cows toss dogs," said Soa, showing her teeth. "Here is another complication," thought Leonard to himself. "One day this woman will make friends with her venerable parent and betray us, and then where shall we be? Well, among so many dangers an extra one does not matter." "I must go to bed," said Juanna faintly. "My head is swimming. I cannot forget those horrors and that giddy place. When I first saw where I was I nearly fainted and fell, but after a while I grew more used to it. Indeed, while I was speaking to the people I quite forgot my fear, and the height seemed to exhilarate me. What a sight it was! When all is said and done, it is a grand thing to have lived through such an experience. I wonder if anyone has ever seen its like. "You are a marvellous woman, Juanna," said Leonard with admiration. "We owe our lives to your wit and courage." "You see, I was right in insisting on coming with you," she answered, somewhat aggressively. "For our sake, yes; for your own, I am not so sure. To tell you the truth, I think that we should have done better never to have started on this mad expedition. However, things look a little more promising now, though Nam and his company have still to be reckoned with, and we don't seem much nearer the rubies, which are our main object." "No," said Juanna, "they are gone, and we shall be lucky if we do not follow them into the home of that hideous snake. Good night." "Francisco," said Leonard, as he rolled himself up in his blanket, "you had a narrow escape tonight. If I had missed my hold—" "Yes, Outram, it was lucky for me that your arm is strong and your mind quick. I am a dreadful coward, and I can see the place now," and he shuddered. "Always from a child I have believed that I shall die by a fall from some height, and tonight I thought that my hour had come. At first I did not understand, for I was watching the Señora's face in the moonlight, and to me she looked like an angel. Then I saw, and my senses left me. It was as though hands were stretched up from the blackness to drag me down. Yes, I saw the hands. But you saved me, Outram, though that will not help me, for I shall perish in some such way at last. So be it. It is best that I should die, who cannot conquer the evil of my heart." "Nonsense, my friend," said Leonard. "Don't talk like that about dying. We can none of us afford to die just at present, that is, unless we are obliged to do so. Your nerves are upset, and no wonder. As for the evil of your heart, I wish that most men had as little. The world would be better. Come, go to sleep. You will feel very differently tomorrow." Francisco smiled sadly and shook his head. Then he knelt and began to say his prayers. The last thing that Leonard saw before his eyes closed in sleep was the rapt, girlish face of the priest, round which the light of the taper fell like an aureole, as he knelt muttering prayer after prayer with his pale lips. It was 9 o'clock before Leonard awoke next morning, for they had not slept till nearly 4, to find Francisco already up, dressed, and, as usual, praying. When Leonard was ready they adjourned to Juanna's room, where breakfast was prepared for them. Here they found Otter, looking somewhat disturbed. "Baas, baas," he said, "they have come and will not go away." "Who?" asked Leonard. "The woman, baas, she who was given to me to wife, and many other women, her servants, with her. There are more than 20 of them outside, baas, and all of them very big. Now, what shall I do with her, baas? I came here to serve you and to seek the red stones that you desire, and not a woman tall enough to be my grandmother." "I really don't know and don't care," answered Leonard. "If you will be a god you must take the consequences. Only beware, Otter. Lock up your tongue, for this woman will teach you to speak her language, and she may be a spy." "Yes, Boss, I will see to that. Is not my name Silence, and shall women make me talk, me, who have always hated them? But the Boss would not like to marry her himself. I am a god, as you say, though it was you who made me one, Boss, not I, and my heart is large. I will give her to you, Boss." "Certainly not," answered Leonard decidedly. "See if the breakfast is ready. No, I forgot, you are a god, so climb up into the throne and look the part of it, if you can." As he spoke, Juanna came from her room, looking a little pale, and they sat down to breakfast. Before they had finished their meal, Soa announced that Olfan was waiting without. Juanna ordered him to be admitted, and presently he entered. "Is all well, Olfan?" asked Juanna. "All is well, Queen," he answered. "Nam and 300 of his following held council at dawn in the house of the priests yonder. There is much stir and talk in the city, but the hearts of the people are light because their ancient gods have come back to us, bringing peace with them." "Good," said Juanna. Then she began to question him artfully on many things, and by degrees they learnt more of the people of the mist. It seemed, as Leonard had already guessed, that they were a very ancient race, having existed for countless generations on the same misty upland plains. They were not, however, altogether isolated, for occasionally they made war with other savage tribes, but they never intermarried with these tribes, all the captives taken in their wars being offered in sacrifice at the religious festivals. The real governing power in the community was the society of the priests of the Snake, who held their office by hereditary tenure, outsiders being admitted to their body only under very exceptional circumstances. The council of this society chose the kings, and when they were weary of one of them, they sacrificed him and chose another, either from among his issue or elsewhere. This being the custom, as may be imagined, the relations between church and state were much strained, but hitherto, as Olfan explained with suppressed rage, the church had been supreme. Indeed, the king for the time being was only its mouthpiece, or executive officer. He led the armies, but the superstitions of the people, and even of the soldiers themselves, prevented him from wielding any real power, and unless he chanced to die naturally, his end was nearly always the same: to be sacrificed when the seasons were bad, or Jâl was angry. The country was large but sparsely populated. The fighting men numbered not more than 4,000, of whom about half lived in the great city, the rest occupying villages here and there on the mountain slopes. As a rule, the people were monogamous, except the priests. It was the custom of sacrifice which kept the population to its low level, made the powers of the priests absolute, and their wealth greater than that of all the other inhabitants of the country put together, for they chose the victims that had offended against Jâl or against the mother goddess, and confiscated their possessions to the service of the temple. Thus the great herds of half-wild cattle which the travellers had seen on the plains belonged to the priests, and the priests took a fourth of the produce of every man's field and garden, that is, when they did not take it all, and his life with it. Twice every year great festivals were held in the temple of Jâl, at the beginning of the spring season and in the autumn after the ingathering of the crops. At each of these festivals many victims were offered in sacrifice, some upon the stone, and some by being hurled into the boiling pool beneath the statue, there to be consumed by the snake, or swept down the secret course of the underground river. The feast celebrated in the spring was sacred to Jâl, and that in the autumn to the mother goddess. But there was this difference between them, that at the spring ceremony Female victims only were sacrificed to Yaw to propitiate him and to avert his evil influence, while at the autumn celebration males alone were offered up to the mother goddess in gratitude for her gifts of plenty. Also, criminals were occasionally thrown to the Snake that his hunger might be satisfied. The priests had other rites, Olfan added, and these they would have an opportunity of witnessing if the spring festival, which should be celebrated on the second day from that date, were held according to custom. "It shall not be celebrated," said Juanna almost fiercely. Then Leonard, who had hitherto listened in silence, asked the question through Juanna. "How is it," he said, "that Nam and his fellows, being already in absolute power, were so willing to accept the gods Jâl and Aca when they appeared in person, seeing that henceforth they must obey, not rule?" "For two reasons, Lord," Olfan answered. "First, because the gods are gods, and their servants know them, and secondly, because Nam has of late stood in danger of losing his authority. Of all the chief priests that have been told of, Nam is the most cruel and the most greedy. For 3 years he has doubled the tale of sacrifice, and though the people love these sights of death, they murmur, for none know upon whom the knife shall fall. Therefore he was glad to greet the gods come back, since he thought that they would confirm his power and set him higher than he sat before. Now he is astonished, because they proclaim peace and will have none of the sacrifice of men, for Nam does not love such gentle gods." "Yet he shall obey them," said Otter, speaking for the first time by the mouth of Juanna, who all this while was acting as interpreter, "or drink his own medicine, for I myself will sacrifice him to myself." When Juanna had translated the dwarf's bloodthirsty threat, Olfan bowed his head meekly and smiled. Clearly the prospect of Nam's removal did not cause him unmixed grief. It was curious to see this stately warrior chief humbling his pride before the misshapen, knob-nosed Kaffir. "Say, Olfan," asked Leonard, "who cut from rock the great statue on which we sat last night? And what is that reptile we saw when the woman was thrown into the pool of troubled waters?" "Ask the water dweller of the water dweller, the snake of the snake, and the dwarf of his image," answered Olfan, nodding towards Otter. "How can I, who am but a man, tell of such things, Lord? I only know that the statue was fashioned in the far past, when we, who are now but a remnant, were a great people, and as for the snake, he has always lived there in his holy place. Our grandfathers' grandfathers knew him, and since that day he has not changed." "Interesting fact in natural history," said Leonard. "I wish I could get him home alive to the zoological gardens." Then he asked another question. "Tell me, Olfan, what became of the red stones yesterday, and of him who offended in offering them to the god yonder?" "The most of them were cast into the pit of waters, Lord, there to be hidden for ever. There were 3 hide sacks full." "Oh heavens!" groaned Leonard, when Juanna had translated this. "Otter, you have something to answer for." "But the choices," went on Olfan, "were put into a smaller bag and tied about the neck of the man who had sinned. They were not many, but among them were the largest stones that until yesterday shone in the eyes of the idol, stones blue and red together. Also there was that stone, shaped like a human heart, which hitherto has been worn by the high priest on the days of sacrifice, and with it the image of the dwarf fashioned from a single gem, and that of the water dweller cut from the great blue stone, and other smaller ones chosen because of their beauty, and also because they have been known for long in the land. For although many of these pebbles are found where the priests dig for them, but few are large and perfect, and the art of shaping them is lost." "And what became of the man?" Leonard asked, speaking as quietly as he could, for his excitement was great. "Nay, I do not know," answered Olfan. "I only know that he was let down with ropes into the home of the Snake, and that he gained the holy place, for it was told to me that he dragged rope after him, perhaps as he fled before the Snake. Now it was promised to the man that when he had laid the bag of stones in the place of the Snake, for the Snake to guard forever, his sins would be purged, and if it pleased the water dweller to spare him, that he should be drawn up again. Thus Nam swore to him, but he did not keep his oath, for when the man had entered the cave he bade those who held the ropes to cast them loose, and I know not what happened to him. But doubtless he is food for the Snake. None who look upon that holy place may live to see the sun again." "I only hope that the brute did not swallow the rubies as well as their bearer," said Leonard to Juanna. "Not that there is much chance of our getting them anyway." Then Olfan went, nor did he return till the afternoon, when he announced that Nam and his two principal priests waited without to speak with them. Juanna ordered that they should be admitted, and presently they came in. Their air was humble, and their heads were bowed, but Leonard saw fury gleaming in their sombre eyes, and was not deceived by this mask of humility. "We come, O ye gods," said Nam, addressing Juanna and Otter, who sat side by side on the throne-like chairs. "We come to ask your will, for ye have laid down a new law which we do not understand. On the 3rd day from now is the feast of Jah, and 50 women are made ready to be offered to Jah, that his wrath may be appeased with their blood, and he may number their spirits among his servants, and withhold his anger from the people of the mist, giving them a good season. This has been the custom of the land for many a generation, and whenever the custom was broken, the sun has not shone, nor the corn grown, nor have the cattle and the goats multiplied after their kind. But now, O ye gods, you have proclaimed a new law, and I, who am yet your servant, come hither to ask your will. How shall the feast go, and what sacrifice shall be offered unto you?" "The feast shall go thus," answered Juanna. "Ye shall offer us a sacrifice indeed. To each of us shall ye offer an ox and a goat, and the ox and the goat shall be given to the Snake to feed him, but not the flesh of men. Moreover, the feast shall be held at noon, and not in the night time." "An ox and a goat, to each an ox and a goat," said Nam humbly, but in a voice of bitterest sarcasm. "As ye will, so let it be, O ye gentle-hearted gods. And the festival shall be held at noon, and not in the night season as of old. As ye will, O ye kind gods. Your word is my law, O Aca and O Jâl," and bowing to the ground, the aged man withdrew himself, followed by his satellites. "That devilish priest makes my flesh creep," said Juanna, when she had translated his words. "Oh, Baas, Baas," echoed Otter, "why did you not shoot him while you might? Now he will surely live to throw us to the Snake." As he spoke, Soa advanced from behind the thrones where she had taken refuge when Nam entered. "It is not well for a dog who gives himself out as a god to threaten the life of one whom he has tricked," she said meaningly. "Perchance the hour shall come when the true God will avenge himself on the false, and by the hand of his faithful servant, whom you would do to death, you base-born dwarf." And before anyone could answer, she left the chamber, casting a malevolent look at Otter as she went. "That servant of yours makes my flesh creep, Juanna," said Leonard. "One thing is clear enough: we must not allow her to overhear any more of our plans. She knows a great deal too much already." "I cannot understand what has happened to Soa," said Juanna. "She seems so changed." You made that remark before, Juanna, but for my part I don't think she has changed. The sight of her amiable parent has developed her hidden virtues, that is all. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of The People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Sacrifice after the New Order. The third day came, the day of sacrifice after the New Order. Nothing particular had happened in the interval. Leonard and Francisco took some walks through the city, guarded by Peter and the settlement men. That was all. They did not see much there, except the exteriors of the houses built of stone and roofed with turves, and the cold stare of curiosity with which they were followed by hundreds of eyes gave them a sense of unrest that effectually checked their efforts at closer examination. Once, indeed, they halted in the market-place, which was thronged, whereon all business ceased, and seller, buyer, herdsman, and presiding priests flocked around, staring at them, half in fear and half in curiosity, for they had never seen white men before. This they could not bear, so they returned to the palace. Of course, Otter and Juanna, being divine, were not allowed to indulge in such recreations. They were gods, and must live up to their reputation. For one day Otter endured it. On the second, in spite of Leonard's warnings, he sought refuge in the society of the bride Saga. This was the beginning of evil, for if no man is a hero to his valet de chambre, much less can he remain a god for long in the eyes of a curious woman. Here, as in other matters, familiarity breeds contempt. Leonard saw these dangers and spoke seriously to the dwarf on the subject. Still he could not conceal from himself that, putting aside the question of his ennui, which made his conduct natural, at any rate in a savage, Otter's position was a difficult one. So Leonard shrugged his shoulders and consoled himself as best he could with the reflection that, at least, his wife would teach the dwarf something of her language, which, by the way, he himself was practising assiduously under the tuition of Juanna and Soa. At noon the party adjourned to the temple, escorted by a bevy of priests and soldiers, for in obedience to Juanna's commands the feast was to be celebrated in the daytime and not at night. As before, the vast amphitheatre was crowded with thousands of human beings, but there was a difference in the arrangements. Juanna and Otter had declined to occupy their lofty thrones, and sat in chairs at the feet of the huge and hideous stone idol, almost on the edge of the pool, Nam alone standing before them, while Leonard, Francisco, and the settlement men ranged themselves on either side. The day was cold and miserable, and snow fell from time to time in large flakes from an ashen sky. Presently Nam addressed the multitude. "People of the Mist," he cried, "ye are gathered here to celebrate the feast of Jâl, according to ancient custom, but the gods have come back to you, as ye know, and the gods in their wisdom have changed the custom. 50 women were prepared for the sacrifice. This morning they rose rejoicing, deeming that they were destined to the snake, but now their joy is turned to sorrow, since the gods will not accept them, having chosen a new offering for themselves. Let it be brought forward." At his word lads appeared from behind the idol, driving 2 lean bulls, and with them a pair of he-goats. Whether by accident or design, they drove them so unskilfully that the animals blundered hither and thither over the rocky platform, till they were finally dispatched with blows from clubs and axes, that is, except one goat, which, escaping its pursuers, rushed down the amphitheatre and scrambled from seat to seat among the audience, uttering a succession of terrified baas. Indeed, the scene was so comic that even that sombre and silent people began to laugh, accustomed as they were on these occasions to the hideous and impressive ceremonial of the midnight sacrifice of so many human beings. The ancient feast was a fiasco. This was a fact which could not be concealed. "Begone, ye people of the mist," said Nam presently, pointing to the dead animals. "The sacrifice is sacrificed. The festival of Yah is done. May the mother plead with the snake that the sun may shine and fruitfulness bless the land." Now scarcely 10 minutes had elapsed since the beginning of the ceremony, which in the ordinary course of events lasted through the greater part of the night, for it was the custom to slaughter each victim singly and with appropriate solemnities. A murmur of disapprobation arose from the far end of the amphitheatre, that swelled gradually to a roar. The people had been thankful to accept Juanna's message of peace, but brutalized as they were by the continual sight of bloodshed, they were not willing to dispense with their carnivals of human sacrifice. A Roman audience gathered to witness a gladiatorial show, to find themselves treated instead to a donkey race and a cockfight, could scarcely have shown more fury. "Bring out the women. Let the victims be offered up to Jâl as of old," the multitude yelled in their rage, and 10 minutes or more elapsed before they could be quieted. Then Nam addressed them cunningly. "People of the mist," he said, "the gods have given us a new law, a law, the sacrifice of oxen and goats in the place of men and maids, and ye yourselves have welcomed that law. No longer shall the blood of victims flow to Jâl beneath the white rays of the moon, while the chant of his servants goes up to heaven. Nay, henceforth this holy place must be a shambles for the kine. So be it, my children. In my old age I hear the gods speaking in an altered voice, and I obey them. It is nothing to me, who am about to die, yet I tell you that rather would I myself be stretched upon the ancient stone than see the worship of our forefathers thus turned into a mockery. The sacrifice is sacrificed. Now may the maid intercede with the snake that plenty may bless the land." And he smiled satirically and turned away. Those of the audience who were near enough to hear his words cried them out to the ranks behind them, and when all understood, there followed a scene of most indescribable tumult. "Blood, give us blood!" roared the populace, their fierce faces alight with rage. "Shall we be mocked with the sacrifice of goats? Offer up the servants of the false gods. Give us blood. Lead forth the victims." In the midst of this uproar, Juanna, clad in her white robes and with the red stone bound upon her brow, rose from her seat to speak. "Silence!" cried Nam. "Hear the voice of Aca," and by degrees the shouting died away and she spoke. "Do you dare thus offer outrages to the gods?" she cried. "Be warned, lest we bring death and famine upon you all. Men shall be offered up to us no more. I have spoken." For a while there was silence. Then the clamour broke out with redoubled violence, and a portion of the multitude made a rush round the edge of the pool towards the rocky platform, which was repelled by the soldiers in a very half-hearted way. "Now," said Olfan, "I think that these will do well to be going," and he pointed to Leonard, Francisco, and the settlement men. "Doubtless the gods can defend themselves, but if the others do not fly, this is sure, that presently they will be torn to pieces." "Let us all go," said Juanna, whose nerve began to fail her, and suiting the action to the word, she led the way towards the rock tunnel, followed by the others. They were not allowed to reach it unmolested, however, for a number of the crowd, headed as Leonard noticed by two priests, forced their way through the cordon of guards and became mixed with the rear of their little party, the members of which they threatened and struck at savagely. This happened just as they were entering the mouth of the tunnel, behind the statue where the gloom was great. This tunnel was protected by a door which, so soon as they thought that all had passed, Olfan and Leonard made haste to close, leaving the mob howling without. Then they pressed on to the palace, which they reached in safety, Olfan remaining behind, however, to watch the movements of the mob. "Oh, why would you not suffer them to sacrifice according to their wicked custom, shepherdess?" said Otter. "What does it matter if they kill each other? So there shall be fewer of them. Now the end of it must be that the devils will find us out and murder us." "No, no," said Francisco, "the Senora was right. Let us trust in Providence and keep ourselves clean from such iniquity." As he spoke, the roars of wrath in the distance changed to a shout of triumph, followed by silence. "What is that?" said Juanna faintly. At this moment Olfan pushed the curtains aside and entered, and his face was heavy. "Speak, Olfan," she said. "The people sacrifice as of old, Queen," he answered. "All of us did not pass the gate. Two of your black servants were mixed up with the crowd and left, and now they offer them to Jâl and others with them." Leonard ran to the yard and counted the settlement men, who were huddled together in their fear, staring towards the temple through the bars of the gate. 2 were missing. As he returned, he met Olfan coming out. "Where is he going?" he asked of Juanna. "To guard the gates. He says that he cannot be sure of the soldiers. Is it true about the settlement men?" "Alas, yes. 2 are gone." She hid her face in her hands and shuddered. "Poor creatures," she said presently in a hoarse voice. "Why did we ever bring them here? Oh, Leonard, is there no escape from this land of demons?" "I hope so," he answered, then added, "Come, Juanna, do not give way. Things look so bad that they are sure to mend." "There is need of it," she sobbed. All that evening and night they watched, hourly expecting to be attacked and dragged forth to sacrifice, but no attack was made. Indeed, on the morrow they learnt from Olfan that the people had dispersed after sacrificing about 100 of human beings, and that quiet reigned in the city. Now began the most dreadful of their trials, and the longest, for it endured 5 whole weeks. As has been said, the climate of these vast upland plains, backed by snow-clad mountains that are the dwelling place of the people of the mist, is cold during the winter months to the verge of severity, but at a certain period of the year, almost invariably within a day or 2 of the celebration of the feast of Jâl, the mists and frost vanish, and warm weather sets in with bright sunshine. This is the season of the sowing of crops, and upon the climatic conditions of the few following weeks depends the yield of the harvest. Should the spring be delayed by even a week or 2, a short crop would certainly result, but if its arrival is postponed for a month, it means something like a famine during the following winter. For although this people dwell on highlands, they cultivate the same sorts of grain which are common in these latitudes, namely maize and sundry varieties of Kaffir corn, having no knowledge of wheat and the other hardy cereals. Therefore it is all important to them that the corn should have a fair start, for if the autumn frosts catch it before it is fit to harvest, the great portion of the crop turns black and is rendered useless. These agricultural details had no small bearing upon the fate of our adventurers. The feast of Jâl was celebrated in order to secure a good seed bed and springtime for the grain. Juanna and Otter had abolished the hideous ceremonies of that feast, and the people of the mist watched for the result
with a gloomy and superstitious eye. If the season proved more than ordinarily good, all might go well, but if it chanced to be bad, and, as was to be expected, seeing how much depended upon it, this spring proved the very worst which any living man could remember in that country. Day after day the face of the sun was hidden with mists that only yielded to the bitter winds which blew from the mountains at night, so that when the spring should have been a month old, the temperature was still that of midwinter, and the corn would not start at all. Leonard and Juanna soon discovered what this meant for them, and never was the aspect of weather more anxiously scanned than by these two from day to day. In vain every morning the blanket of cold mist fell like a cloud, blotting out the background of the mountains, and every night the biting wind swept down upon them from the fields of snow, chilling them to the marrow. This state of things, wretched enough in itself, was only one of many miseries which afflicted them. Otter and Juanna were still treated as gods indeed, and considerable respect was shown to Leonard and Francisco, that is, within the walls of the palace. But if, wearied with the monotony of their life, they went out, which they did twice only during these 5 dreadful weeks, matters were different. Then they found themselves followed by a mob of men, women and children, who glared at them ferociously and cursed them aloud, asking what their gods had done with the sunshine. On the second occasion, indeed, they were forced to fly for their lives, and after this they gave up making the attempt to walk abroad, and sat in the palace with Juanna and Otter, who, of course, never dared to leave it. It was a terrible life. There was nothing to do, nothing to read, and only anxieties to think on. The greater part of the day Leonard and Juanna occupied in talking for practice in the language of the people of the mist. When their conversation was exhausted, they told each other tales of their adventures in past years, or even invented stories like children, and prisoners. Indeed, they were prisoners, prisoners as they feared, under sentence of death. They grew to know each other very well during those 5 weeks, so well indeed that each could almost guess the other's thoughts, but no tender words ever passed their lips. On this subject, whatever their hearts might feel, their tongues were sealed, and in their curious perversity the chief object of each was to disguise the truth from the other. Moreover, Leonard never for one moment forgot that Juanna was his ward, a fact that in itself would have sufficed to cause him to conceal any tender emotions he might have felt towards her. So they lived side by side, lovers at heart, yet talking and acting as brother and sister might, and through it all were still happy after a fashion, because they were together. But Soa was not happy. She felt that her mistress no longer trusted her, and was at no loss to guess the cause. Day by day she stood behind them like a mummy at an Egyptian feast, and watched Leonard with ever-growing jealousy. Francisco, for his part, did not attempt to conceal his fears. He was certain that they were about to perish, and sought consolation in the constant practice of religion, which was edifying but scarcely improved him as a companion. As for Otter, he also believed that the hour of death was nigh, but being a fatalist, this did not trouble him much. On the contrary, in spite of Leonard's remonstrances, he began to live hard, betaking himself freely to the beer pot. When Leonard remonstrated with him, he turned somewhat sulky. "Today I am a god, boss," he answered. "Tomorrow I may be carrion. While I am a god, let me drink and be merry. All my days also women have cursed me because I am ugly. Now my wife holds me great and beautiful. What is the good of thinking and looking sad? The end will come soon enough. Already Nam sharpens the knife for our hearts. Come and be merry with me, boss, if the Shepherdess will let you." "Do you take me for a pig like yourself?" said Leonard angrily. "Well, go your own way, foolish that you are, but beware of the beer and the spirits. Now you are beginning to know this language, and when you are drunk you talk. And do you think there are no spies here? That girl Saga is great niece to Nam, and you are besotted with her. Be careful lest you bring us all to death." "Thither we shall come anyway, so let us laugh before we weep, Baas," Otter replied sullenly. "Must I then sit here and do nothing till I die?" Leonard shrugged his shoulders and went. He could not blame the dwarf, who, after all, was a savage, and looked at things as a savage would, notwithstanding Francisco's earnest efforts to convert him. He sometimes wished, so deep was his depression, that he also was a savage and could do likewise. But the worst of their trials is still to be told. For the first week the settlement men stayed in the palace, their fears and the rumours that had reached them of the terrible fate of their two lost companions keeping them quiet. By degrees, however, this dread wore off, and one afternoon, wearied with the sameness of their life, they yielded to the solicitations of some men, who spoke to them through the bars of the great gate, and went out in a body without obtaining Leonard's permission. That night they returned drunk, at least 10 of them dead. The other 2 were missing. When they were sober again, Leonard questioned them as to the whereabouts of their companions, but they could give him no satisfactory information. They had been into various houses in the city, they said, where the people had plied them with beer, and they remembered nothing more. These 2 men never reappeared, but the rest of them, now thoroughly frightened, obeyed Leonard's orders and stayed in the palace, although the decoy men still came frequently to the gates and called them. They passed the days in wandering about and drinking to drown their fears, and the nights huddled together for protection from an unseen foe, more terrible and craftier than the leopard of their native rocks. But these precautions were all in vain. One morning, hearing a tumult among them, Leonard went to see what was the matter. 3 more of the settlement men were missing. They had vanished in the night, none could say how, vanished though the doors were barred and guarded. There where they had slept lay their guns and little possessions, but the men were gone, leaving no trace. When he was consulted, Olfan looked very grave, but could throw no light upon the mystery beyond suggesting that there were many secret passages in the palace, of which the openings were known only to the priests, and that possibly the men had been let down them. Terrible information enough for people in their position. End of chapter 25.